Dhamma greetings to everyone joining us today for another part of the series of the Dhamma Center's sustainability, regarding Dhamma Center's sustainability series. So today we have with us Don de Silva, who is no stranger to any one of us. Don has decades-long experience within the field of diplomacy, sustainable development, and the environment. And we have had the good fortune of listening to Don present to the Dhamma Center community a number of times with regards to what the Buddha said with regards to countering fake speech, Buddhist living, and also what the Buddha said about consumer culture. Today's session has been specially organized as a result of our joint conversations in light of what we face as Buddhists in context of what is going on in Sri Lanka and also all across the world. And we thought that it would be apt and appropriate to see what the Buddha really said about good governance, about corruption, dealing with corruption, and how the Buddha in his time, how he dealt with it. And as followers, as people who are engaged with the practice of Buddhism and the learning of Buddhism, how it is appropriate for us to conduct ourselves in line with what the Buddha has taught. Today's session is one which is interactive. It is a workshop of sorts where we look forward to hearing your comments, answering your questions, and also Don has expressed that he would also like to ask for your sort of thoughts on certain topics that he would bring up. So I encourage everyone to interact and engage with the session as much as possible. And with the complexity of the times that we have found ourselves in, I think it would be more suitable that we voice our opinions and try to collectively come into an understanding about what and how the Buddha's leadership could help us at this point in time. So without much further ado, Don, thank you very much for being with us today. And I am handing over the session to you, Don.
Thank you so much, Bhante. This, of course, is an initiative that you highlighted the importance of Buddhism and governance. So I'm going to go into it, but also as a way of a little bit of interaction. I was a former director of the United Nations Environment Program, then a director of the International Institute for Environment and Development, now a Buddhist chaplain at several universities here in the UK, and I do provide mentoring, and I have been involved in these issues for some time. I'm now going to share the screen.
Yes, Don.
So sharing my screen and also going into the slideshow, playing from the start. So I hope you can all hear me, and I hope you can see the slides. So we are now presenting Buddhism, governance, and corruption. And let me go right into the Buddha's description of corruption. The Buddha highlighted a corrupt union. Ukkotana vanchana nikati sachi yoga. The crooked practice of corruption, deception, and fraud. This is in the Brahmajala Sutta. So the word yoga is derived from, of course, the Sanskrit root yuj, which means to join or to yoke or to connect or to unite. So the Buddha really was talking about something more deeper in terms of a corrupt attachment to things that are happening. And with that, I'm going to provide you with a presentation outline. As Bhante Panyamamsa said, this is a working session. So I will be presenting maybe for about, say, 40, 50 minutes. I'd like to see how the temperature is like, and then we may break for 5 to 6 or 7 minutes, and then we can resume. But we're going to deal with the significance of the Tipitaka, definition of corruption and its global impact, the UN Convention on Corruption, governance issues in Sri Lanka, the Buddha's description of corruption, how the Buddha and his disciples acted on corruption, Buddhism and the law, beyond human rights, clear case studies on corruption in the Tipitaka, corrupt rulers and their impact on people and beyond, the establishment of an independent Sangha, speaking truth to those in power, how the Buddha and his disciples did it, the Buddhist principles of governance, and the role of Buddhism for a sustainable Sri Lanka and the world. So that's quite a lot, but I hope to make them succinct so that we move smoothly and swiftly from one theme to the next. So my entire presentations are really based on the Buddha's discourses, some 15,505 discourses, long, short, middle, numbered, and so on. But of course, when you're dealing with Buddhist presentations or teachings about the Dhamma, of course, the focus is on the Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, enlightenment, and so on and so forth. But to me, the Buddhist texts deal not only with the core principles of Buddhism, they have rich information about the way the Buddha, his disciples, women and men dealt with very key social, political, and economic issues of the day, which are so relevant now. For instance, just to give you a little bit of the issues that he dealt with: corruption, religious strife, terrorism, fake news, good governance, accountability, leadership, racism, casteism, equity, liberation of women, and sustainability. So I have left out a large amount of text about corruption in the Tipitaka. I'm going to just present to you a handful of leaves about these issues today. So let's take a global view of what is happening concerning corruption in the world. The Transparency International defines corruption as follows. We define corruption as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Corruption erodes trust, weakens democracy, hampers economic development, and further exacerbates inequality, poverty, social division, and the environmental crisis. Exposing corruption and holding the corrupt to account can only happen if we understand the way corruption works and the systems that enable it. In a nutshell, this is a wonderful summary of what the Buddha said and did. Let's see the evidence as we move along. So, the United Nations also has the Convention Against Corruption, which was approved by the General Assembly in 2004. And this is the document concerning corruption in the UN, which you can download from online. The UNICOD agency has this in their website. So they describe corruption as an insidious plague that has a wide range of corrosive effects on societies. It undermines democracy, the rule of law, leads to violation of human rights, distorts markets, erodes the quality of life, and allows organized crime, terrorism, and other threats to human security to flourish. Not that very different from the Buddha's day 2,500 years ago. The evil phenomenon is found in all countries, big and small, rich and poor, but it is in the developing countries that its effects are most destructive. Corruption hurts the poor disproportionately, diverting funds intended for development, undermining a government's ability to provide basic services, feeding inequality and justice, and discouraging foreign aid and investment. So this was adopted by the General Assembly, resolution in 31st October 2003. It has today 140 signatories, including Sri Lanka. Now it has been updated to 189. So the UN Convention Against Corruption is the only legally binding universal anti-corruption instrument. The UNODC has regional branches right across the world. Moving on to the global illicit economy. This is a very interesting report that was published in March 2021. And the report was made through funding by the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs and the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And let's see what the figures are on the global illicit economy. Totally, the world domestic product amounts to something like $81 trillion per year. According to this report, 10% of the global GDP may be held in offshore tax haven countries. 10%, that is $8 trillion. Private wealth is hidden in tax haven countries, something like $7 trillion, and bribes every year, they estimate amounting to $20 to $40 billion a year. $20 to $40 billion a year. So, moving on to Sri Lanka. I was interested in this statement by the former Auditor General, Gamini Vijayasinghe, who presented an interesting 8-point program to restore democracy, good governance, and accountability. And his proposals point out that the current situation concerns an utterly corrupt political party system, which has caused irreparable damage to the country. And his proposals concern the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. He says in an interview with the Island newspaper that the country couldn't be saved unless the executive, legislature, and the judiciary were brought under the law. And he refers to the 2015-2016 Treasury bond scams, the 6.7 million payment to China last year for a consignment of carbonic fertilizer rejected by Sri Lanka. And the former Auditor General submitted proposals at a meeting which was organized jointly by the watchdog PAFREL and the 12th March movement. The President's Counsel, Kalinga Indatissa, also gave a very interesting interview concerning what was happening in Sri Lanka in a conversation with Kishani Alanki recently. Commenting on the people's movement or the people's activities that are taking place in Sri Lanka, he said, it is not something which was built overnight. There was a particular period, that time, and the people in this country, when they were skeptical about the outcome of expectations and the aspirations of people. This boiled up to the current situation we are going through. He said, the people are not thinking of a regime change. They're going for a systems change. And he says the general public of this country has been a bit aloof about the political system, the electoral system, the constitution, and various other connected factors. But what we see today is a situation where the aspirations of the people were not kept in mind by the ruling parties throughout the period, and it has now surfaced to a situation where there is a social, economic, and political struggle. Also, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, who administered the Pandora Papers and undertake investigations into the application or what's happened within the Pandora Papers, recently pointed out that the probe concerning Pandora Papers and corrupt action concerning individuals in Sri Lanka has come to a halt, and it is being delayed. What is the situation concerning Buddhism and the law? Let's take a look at this. Looking into countries where the Buddhism is a state religion. Bhutan, Cambodia, and then Sri Lanka. Then there are countries in the world where Buddhism holds a special status, where Buddhism is not recognized as a state religion, but holds a special status. And they are the Thailand, Laos, Mongolia, Myanmar, and Kalmykia. Those of you who may be pondering about where Kalmykia is, perhaps you might just do a little Google search and you will find this state to be a very, very interesting state, which is prevalent in Russia. Moving on to Sri Lanka's situation concerning Buddhism and the Constitution. This is outlined in Chapter 2 of the Constitution, which says the Republic of Sri Lanka shall give to Buddhism the foremost place, and accordingly it shall be the duty of the state to protect and foster the Buddha Sasana, whilst assuring all religions the rights granted by Articles 10 and 14. But what I find in what I have come across so far is that the role of the state and Buddhism has been discussed and deliberated at length since independence. The focus has been in how to protect and foster the Buddha Sasana. But there has been not that many situations or documents, events where there has been discussions about what the application of Buddhism to the executive, judiciary, and the legislature might be. How would you apply these principles? And there is a very interesting paper which I came across written by Benjamin Chantal and Asanga Velikala on past debates, present challenges, working papers on constitutional reform of the Buddhist chapter. They say it is difficult to define the jurisprudence of the Buddhism chapter for two reasons. First, the Sri Lankan courts, with some exceptions discussed, being reluctant to offer strong interpretations of the Buddhism chapter. When compared with other areas of law in Sri Lanka, there is a conspicuous dearth of references to the Buddhism chapter in reported cases. So there is a serious lack of documentation on how Buddhist values and principles apply to our branches of government. Then I've come across another very interesting paper, regrettably not from an educational institution in Sri Lanka, but from the University at Buffalo School of Law. And this paper by Rebecca French points this out. There are literally hundreds of thousands of books on Christianity and its relationship to the rules of the Bible, canonical law, and the Christian legal systems on Jewish law, the Torah, the Talmud, and the history of Judaism, on Sharia and the role of Islamic law in different Middle Eastern countries, on Hindu law and its relationship to the politics of India. But writing on Buddhist law and the effects of Buddhism on legal systems is only just beginning to be explored. There are very few scholars of and written little on the legal concepts in the Buddhist tradition. So this might be something that would be of interest to budding constitutional specialists there. And also, this may be something that I would like to raise with, I'm sure there must be people in the Sangha here who are knowledgeable, conversant, and experts on law and on the Constitution and legal practice. I hope they will comment on this, because I would like to be corrected, perhaps, or helped if possible. Walking the talk. So let's take a bit of let's step back a little bit to put this in context in terms of where the Buddha came from. The Buddha came from the Sakyan kingdom to the northeast of Kosala, bordering today Nepal and India. You will find the arrow there, and also you might find my my mouse pointer. You have, it was north here between Kosala and Magadha, the biggest Mahajanapadas that were there at the time. Siddhartha Gautama was born into wealth and privilege. He was the son of the ruler of the Sakyan Janapada. And the Shakyans were an independent oligarchic republic state known as the Sakya Janaraj. Its capital was Kapilavastu, and the Buddha was the son of Suddhodana, the elected leader of the Sakyan people, and he would have been the one to take over the leadership of the republic. They were a warrior and a ministerial community. But it's interesting to see the progress or the process of the Buddha. From royalty, the move from royalty to liberation. From having all to be attached to nothing. And from a palace to this place which is prevalent today, Gandhakuti, in the Jetavana monastery in Shravasti in Uttar Pradesh, India. Maybe some of you might have been here. Remains of the hut where the Buddha used to live. So as far as corruption is concerned, do take a look at the way the Buddha walked the talk. I just want to stop here for a bit to find out if there are any urgent, desperate points that you may want to bring up. Just pausing for a minute. Okay, moving on to corrupt lifestyles. So, the Buddha was very precise when he described corrupt lifestyles. And this is in the long discourses too, or the Digha Nikaya too, in the Samanya Pala Sutta. Fruits of ascetic life. Let's take a look at how he described corruption during his time. The Buddha was once challenged by King Ajatasattu of Magadha to demonstrate whether a contemplative life plays a productive role in society. And the Buddha was very specific and direct in his response. There are some ascetics and Brahmins who, while enjoying food given in faith, still make use of high and luxurious bedding. This includes such things as sofas, couches, woolen covers, shed-piled, colorful, white, embroidered with flowers, quilted, embroidered with animals, double or single fringed and silk covers studded with gems, as well as silken sheets, woven carpets, rugs for elephants, horses, chariots, antelope, hide rugs, and spreads of fine deer hide with a canopy above and red cushions at both ends. Such were his intricate powers of observation. Continuing with the Samanyapala Sutta, there are some ascetics and Brahmins who, while enjoying food given in faith, still engage in beautifying and adorning themselves with garlands, fragrance, and makeup. This includes such things as applying beauty products by anointing, massaging, bathing, and rubbing, mirrors, ointments, garlands, fragrances, and makeup, face powder, foundations, bracelets, headbands, fancy walking sticks or containers, rapiers, parasols, fancy sandals, turbans, jewelry, chowries, and long fringed white robes. This is a clear and precise description of profligate and corrupt living. So what was done in terms of taking action on corruption? The Karandava Sutta points to a very interesting case study in the Anguttara Nikaya concerning what happened to a monk. On one occasion, the Buddha was dwelling at Kampa. Monks were reproving a monk for an offense. When being reproved, the monk answered evasively, diverted the discussion to an irrelevant subject, and displayed anger, hatred, and resentment. Then the Buddha addressed the monks. Monks, eject this person. Monks, eject this person. This person should be banished. Why should another's son vex you? Here, monks, so long as the monks don't see his offense, a certain person has the same deportment as the good monks. When, however, they see his offense, they know him as a corruption among ascetics, just chaff and trash amongst ascetics. Then they expel him. For what reason? So that he doesn't corrupt the good monks. So the action was decisive and direct. And then he, in the latter part of the Karandava Sutta, says this in verse. They speak to people with a voice so smooth, just like an ascetic, but they act in secret, those disrespectful ones with bad reviews. You should recognize them for what they are, a creep and a liar, a creep and a liar. Then, having gathered in harmony, you should expel them. Throw out the trash, get rid of the rubbish, and sweep away the scraps, those non-ascetics who imagine themselves to be ascetics. This concerns a case study based on ejection. And this is cited in the Uposatha Sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, H20. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in the Eastern monastery. And the Buddha was sitting surrounded by the Sangha of monks. It was in the evening, and a large gathering was waiting for the monks and they were expectantly waiting for the Buddha to speak. But he remained silent. And Venerable Ananda got up from his seat, raised his joint palms towards the Buddha and said, "Sir, the night is getting late. It's the first watch of the night. The Sangha has been sitting long. Please, sir, may the Buddha recite the monastic code to the mendicants." And the Buddha continued to remain in silence until the third time. And the Buddha responded, "Ananda, the assembly is not pure. The assembly is not pure." Then Venerable Mahamoggallana paid attention to what was going on. And he pondered, who is the Buddha talking about? And he focused on comprehending the minds of everyone in the Sangha. And he saw that unethical person, rotten inside, corrupt and depraved, sitting in the middle of the Sangha. When he saw him, he got up from his seat, went up to him and said, "Get up, Reverend. The Buddha has seen you. You can't live in communion with the mendicants." But when he said this, the person kept silent. For a second time, for a third time, the person did not move. Then Venerable Mahamoggallana took the person by the arm, ejected him out of the gate, and bolted the door. Then he went to the Buddha and said to him, "I have ejected that person. The assembly is pure." And the Buddha responded, "It is incredible, Moggallana. It is amazing how that foolish man waited to be taken by the arm." So that was an ejection of a corrupt individual. The Buddha also once commented on corrupt intentions. Those mendicants who explain a light offense as a serious offense as a light offense, an offense committed with corrupt intentions as an offense not committed with corrupt intentions, an offense not committed with corrupt intention as an offense committed with corrupt intention, an offense requiring rehabilitation as an offense not requiring rehabilitation. As you will see from here, the Buddha was referring to fake news, to fake ways of describing corrupt action, which is very relevant in the world today as we see what is going on. And those with corrupt intentions are acting for the hurt and unhappiness of the people, for the harm, hurt, and suffering of gods and humans. Those mendicants make much bad karma and make the true teaching disappear. Make the true teaching disappear. The Buddha also dealt with and referred to corrupt rulers during his time. And he was very clear about this, and the Buddha was not hesitant in speaking truth to power. In the Anguttara Nikaya, number discourses 470, in the sutta called Adhammika, the Buddha says the following: at a time when kings are corrupt, royal officials become corrupt. When royal officials are corrupt, Brahmins and householders become corrupt. When Brahmins and householders are corrupt, the people of town and country become corrupt. When the people of town and country are corrupt, the courses of the moon and the sun become erratic. The courses of the stars and constellations, the days and nights, the months and fortnights, the seasons and years become erratic. The blowing of the winds become erratic and chaotic. The deities are angered. The heavens don't provide enough rain. The crops ripen erratically. When people eat crops that have ripened erratically, they become short-lived, ugly, weak, and sickly. So in the Buddha's teachings is the fact that corruption of an individual impacts the people in the country, and also even, he says, it goes beyond and impacts the elements, the cosmos. And in this sutta, of course, conversely, when the kings are principled, royal officials become principled, and it goes down the line. The heavens provide plenty of rain. When the heavens provide plenty of rain, the crops ripen well. The people eat crops that have ripened well. They become long-lived, beautiful, strong, and healthy. This is the Dhammika way of doing things. How are we doing for time, and how are you getting on? Are there any areas where anyone is immediately desperate to know about or to find any explanation?
We are good on time, Don.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes, yes. Just
yeah.
one thing, Don, with regards to this representation that you have made from the Adhammika Sutta, I think it is a very apt and appropriate thing to also sort of look at the situation that we sort of have, where the sutra speaks about a top-down effect. And we currently have the world over, we see a down sort of people are making the effort. People are asking for a change of systems, and how appropriate and successful such a sort of a course would be in line with what the Buddha taught.
Indeed, Bhante. And I have never come across a statement where there is a very clear linkage that has been made between the corrupt leadership, and not just the corrupt leadership, but also the religious leadership. Then it goes down the line with the householders, and it goes beyond that to the elements and then to the cosmos. This is something which I have not come across before. I just wanted to highlight that.
Yes, thank you, Don.
And also, the Buddha created some poetry concerning corruption in this manner. When cattle ford a river, if the bull goes off course, they all go off course because their leader is off course. It is for humans when the one agreed on as chief. When the one agreed on as chief behaves badly, what do you expect the rest to do? What do you expect the rest to do? The whole country sleeps badly when the king is unprincipled. I can't put it more directly and graphically than this. And then he says, when cattle ford a river, if the bull goes straight, they all go straight because their leader is straight. So it is for humans. When the one agreed as chief does the right thing, what do you expect the rest to do? The whole country sleeps happily when the king is just. These are apt for today, but you really need to realize that this was said some 2,500 years ago. And look at what you find in the Tipitaka, of which you are party to and involved with. The Buddha also was pretty direct, as in the previous suttas, with dealing with leadership. And this concerns King Ajatasattu and King Pasenadi fought a battle in which Ajatasattu defeated Pasenadi. And the Buddha said, victory breeds enmity. The defeated one sleeps badly. The peaceful one sleeps at ease, having abandoned victory and defeat. In another battle, when King Pasenadi defeated King Ajatasattu, the Buddha said, the fool thinks fortune is on his side, so long as his evil does not ripen. But when the evil ripens, the fool incurs suffering. The killer begets a killer, one who conquers a conqueror. The abuser begets abuse, the reviler, the one who reviles. By unfolding of karma, the plunderer is plundered. I just want to say in passing, as we have been discussing very serious matters, that the Buddha, of course, used Moda Puruso and Bala Puruso alternatively. Of course, Bala means childish and childish behavior, people with childish behavior. The Buddha also used deliberately Moda Puruso. And I just, for the fun of it, in the Majjhima Nikaya, researched a little bit and came across the fact that in the Majjhima alone, there are something like 73 references to fool or foolish person. That is just a little tiny factoid for you. And of course, as you know, in the Dhammapada, there is an entire chapter, I think it's chapter 5, which relates to Balavago, or 16 verses or so about childish behavior. Speed. The Buddha responded to dealing with corruption with speed. He said, mendicants, a fine royal thoroughbred with 4 factors is worthy of a king, fit to serve a king and considered a factor of kinship. What 4? Integrity, speed, patience, and kindness. A fine royal thoroughbred with these four factors is worthy of a king. So the Buddha was not a person who took a laid-back attitude. Speed was of the essence in dealing with issues for him. Sorry. Democracy. Democracy is not something which is new to us. I put it to you that the democratic traditions of Sri Lanka go back some 2,500 years ago. And I would like to here bring in some of the observations made by Bhikkhu Bodhi, who was responsible for many books and also for translating much of the Tipitaka into English. And Bhikkhu Bodhi says this about Buddhism and democracy. He says, the Vinaya Pitaka contains not only explanations of the individual monastic rules, but also regulations for conducting communal acts. These regulations also bring to light the Buddha's concern to safeguard communal harmony. In order for a communal procedure to be valid for a Sangha living in a particular locality, all residents, whether permanent or visiting, must either be present, or if they cannot participate directly, for instance, because of illness, they must give their consent for the procedure to take place in their absence. Transactions, by that meaning resolutions, are divided into four categories. Those that can be authorized merely on the basis of an announcement, those that require a motion, those that require a motion and a single proclamation, and those that require a motion and 3 proclamations. Those acts that require more complex procedure are considered more important than those that can pass with a similar procedure. You may note here that the important motions require 3 proclamations. And here you may wish to note that a bill in the UK Parliament requires the same passage 3 times from the House of Parliament to the House of Lords. Thus, an act of ordination, by which case a candidate is admitted to the Sangha, is considered an important procedure that requires a motion and 3 proclamations, while appointing a monk as a distributor of meals requires only a motion and 1 proclamation. Just to give you an explanation concerning the different degrees of importance of a proclamation. And during the procedure, this is really important, the members of the community give their consent by remaining silent. All present are invited to voice any objection during the process. And if there are no objections, the transaction is declared to have taken place. The Buddha and the concept of law. Moving on to this really interesting area, and I came across this wonderful book. Please get hold of this book and study for those who are into these areas of concern, by Professor Kalupahana, Emeritus Professor of Philosophy at the University of Hawaii. Professor Kalupahana, in his book, says, a law as recognized in the pre-Buddhist traditions is invariably associated with the concept of permanence. This is really important, and I would like to kindly ensure that you are attentive to this particular set of points. For example, the Varna Dhamma, the law of color, or the law which highlights caste and race, then Ashrama Dhamma and the Swabhava Dhamma. These were preeminent in Vedic times. And the Buddha went directly against these concepts of law. It is indeed a concept that the Buddha rejected in his first discourse to the world. According to his theory of knowledge, he could not discover anything permanent and eternal in the world and life in it. This is one area where there is a clear difference in terms of law between Vedic law and Buddhist principles. Thus, instead of laws specially determined by the duties of birth to any caste, to any particular caste, the Buddha presented a variety of principles, conditional but not permanent and eternal, that would lead to the deterioration of the amelioration of human society. And one of the most interesting suttas, as far as I'm concerned, is in the Suruchi Jataka. And this concerns an interaction between Visakha and the Buddha. As you know, Visakha was a prominent entrepreneur during the time of the Buddha. Perhaps you could liken her today to Bill Gates or to Warren Buffett in philanthropy. And she provided a lot of support to the Sangha during her time. And Visakha observed the fact that the numbers of the Sangha were growing, but that the principle that the Buddhist robes should be varying from material that appealed to no one else. By that is meant material discarded by people in the community in rubbish heaps, was creating problems. So she decided to take action. And she went to the Buddha. He was residing at the Pubarama monastery. And after the meal, she approached the Buddha and asked for 8 requests or 8 boons. Then the Buddha stated that the Buddha was not in a position to grant requests. He said the Tathagata is not in the business of granting requests. Visakha explained that they were of benefit to the Buddhist monks and asked permission to name them. And she was permitted to name them. Visakha requested that as long as she lived, she is permitted to offer robes to the monks during the rainy season, offer food to the monks arriving in Savatthi, offer food for the monks leaving Savatthi, offer medicine for the sick monks, offer food for the sick monks, offer food to the monks attending to the sick monks, offer rice gruel to the monks in the morning, and offer bathing robes to nuns to bathe in the river. The Buddha then questioned Visakha as to what benefits she expected to receive from these offerings. She explained that she came to know of any monk who had recited or visited Savatthi, has attained any stages of the spiritual path, she would know that he would have received some of her offerings. When she reflected on that, she will feel glad and happy. Her mind is happy. Her body will be tranquil. When her body is tranquil, she will feel pleasure. When she feels pleasure, her mind will become concentrated. When her mind is concentrated, it will result in the development of spiritual faculties, spiritual powers, and factors of enlightenment. And that was her submission. The Buddha listened to the submission, changed the earlier rule, and granted her requests. So look at this interesting case study. Clearly there was a Vinaya rule, a principle. That rule did not appear to be working. A person decided to do something about it, approached the Buddha. The Buddha then questioned. There was a dialogue. The points were taken on board, and then a ruling was given. So the principles of Buddhism are not set in stone. How are we doing with time, and how's everybody doing? Should I go on, or should we take a break? Or are there any urgent questions, issues that you'd like to raise? Is there anything that urgently needs clarification? How are you getting on over there? I can't see the chat at the moment.
We do not have any questions in the chat. And to then point out, if you do have any questions, do please put them on the chat, or feel free. We will have a discussion time as well coming up. So feel free to pop any questions that you might have in the chat section as well.
Thank you, Bhante. I will now come to this really important area of human rights to try and examine how the Buddha and his disciples dealt with this important issue. There are many human rights groups active both within and without Sri Lanka. They include the UN Human Rights Commission, Human Rights Watch, Transparency International, and so on. And human rights are moral principles or norms for certain standards of human behavior, and are regularly protected in municipal, national, and international law. And they are commonly understood as inalienable fundamental rights to which a person is inherently entitled to simply because she or he is a human being, and which are inherent in all human beings. So hold that thought, and now let's move to how this matter is dealt with in Buddhism. Starting with the 5 precepts. I'm sure all of you recite these precepts every day, but just take a look at this, just step back. So you go on by saying, I undertake the precept 2. I undertake the precept 2. Abstain from taking life, abstain from misconduct concerning sense pleasures, abstain from false speech, abstain from fermented and distilled intoxicants, which are the basis for heedlessness. So these 5 precepts are not laws that are set in stone. They are obligations. A fundamental difference in Buddhism, where you go beyond rights. There are responsibilities of the individual to the other. We undertake them in a voluntary manner. They are not commandments. And these precepts highlight the fact that there is no fundamental difference between any human. Our obligations extend to all creatures. But the Buddha went further than, in many ways, human beings by pointing out that we should also be thinking of all creatures on the planet. And this is, for me as an environmentalist, one of the most interesting, for me, this is one of the most important suttas, and I call the Metasuta the Buddhist Declaration on Sustainability. Let's take a look at this. One of the verses in the Metasuta goes like this: Mata yata niyang putta. Even as a mother would protect her life. Ayusa ikaputtang anurakke. Her child, her only child. Evampi sabba bhutesu. Evampi sabba bhutesu. So too for all creatures. Manasam bhavaya primana. With a boundless heart. So this is not just only with human beings. It is about going beyond human beings to all creatures. This is a very complicated issue when you think about it, but it is a challenging issue. And I really think that in Sri Lanka and in the world, I do believe that Buddhists need to be at the forefront of discussions on human rights and responsibilities. I don't see many Buddhist organizations making statements or making submissions or taking action on these issues. It's something which I would like to get your response to. Transparency. So everything as far as activities were concerned were done in an open and transparent manner. This concerns the chapter on offenses entailing confessions. The training rule on abusive speech. How did that come about? Because rules did not come out of the thin air, out of the sky like a bolt from thunder and lightning, but it came out of something which happened. It came out of a discussion, an incident, an event. So the Bhikkhu Sangha during the time of the Buddha were not immune from caste attitudes. At one time, the Buddha was staying at Savatthi, at the Jeta Grove. At that time, the monks from the group of 6 were arguing and speaking abusively to some monks. Caste attitudes flared during the argument. They reviled and insulted them about their caste, name, family, lineage, occupation, profession, illness, physical traits, defilements and offenses, and by calling them names. You name it. And following this argument, the quarreling monks were told off by some monks, and the matter was reported to the Buddha. The response was immediate. A meeting was called and held. And the Buddha questioned. There is a long set of questions, but I am now summarizing it and getting it into the main points. The Buddha asked, "Is it true, monks, that you're acting like this?" And the response was, "Is it true?" "It's true, sir." The Buddha then rebuked them. "Foolish men, how can you argue with and abuse good monks?" And then he said, "This won't give rise to confidence in those without it." Please consider the phrase. Please consider this. Take time to look at these statements. Don't necessarily just go with some of the key principles of the Dhamma. Take time to reflect on this. This won't give rise to confidence in those without it. When you say these kinds of negative comments, reviling about caste, name, family, occupation, profession, and so on and so forth, you erode the confidence of an individual. I find this in my chaplaincy work, particularly at universities, is that some of the things said to people concerning their backgrounds stick with them and erode their confidence. It was true then, and it is true now. This is also to some extent what the Buddha is carrying out, is a counseling process. He is sort of acting the role of an anusasaka, a counselor. And finally, the final ruling. If a monk speaks abusively, he commits an offense entailing a confession. Consider the governing process. A complaint was brought before the Buddha about abusive and discriminatory behavior. An open and transparent hearing was held. It was nothing that was done which was secretive on the side. The accused was called, the information was verified, and the offending monks held accountable. The Sangha then passed a ruling to mitigate and deal with such behavior. This was a clear, effective complaints and grievance procedure at the time, which is very applicable to now. Moving on to direct democracy. And here is an extraordinary statement about the democratic process in the Sangha. And by the Sangha, I mean not the Bhikkhu or the Bhikkhuni Sangha, but by the wider Buddhist community. And the Buddha says concerning this and the participation and the involvement of people, he says, mendicants, lay followers may, if they wish, make a proclamation of no confidence in a mendicant who has 8 qualities. What 8? They try to prevent the lay people from getting material possessions. They try to harm lay people. They insult and abuse lay people. They divide lay people against each other. They criticize the Buddha, the teaching, and the Sangha. They are seen at an inappropriate place for collecting alms. The lay followers may, if they wish, make proclamations of no confidence in a mendicant who has these 8 qualities. In other words, he was calling for and he highlighted an independent Sangha. The Buddha and his followers established an independent Sangha. In the administration of the Sangha, there was a clear separation of authority between the state and the Sangha at the time. And in the suttas, the Sangha is also responsible to the people. But I find this practice somewhat different in the case of Sri Lanka, in the relationships between the Sangha and the state, which is determined by the Buddhist temporalities ordinance. And I am very grateful to Bhante Panyavamsa for drawing my attention to this. This audience dates back to the 1st November 1931. You can download it from here because this determines, and this ordinance has been amended about 10 to 12 times since then, and this is still what exists today. I hope those with legal backgrounds in this community gathered here would also weigh in on this. The temporalities ordinance. Temporal meaning temporal goods and secular properties, and so on. I'm going to just present to you only the key points. Temple means vihara, dagaba, kovila, avasa, and so on and so forth. And it includes the Dalada Maligava, the Siripada Sthana, and the Atamas Sthana. Vihara Dipati means the principal bhikkhus of each of the key temples. All trustees are subject to the supervision of the Commissioner of Buddhist Powers, now the Commissioner for the Department of Buddhist Affairs. Every place will be run by an advisory board. The Commissioner has the function of being involved in the appointments. And then also selections to the posts are administered by the minister. The ordinance comes under the Sri Lanka Parliament. It shall be lawful for the minister to make regulations. You need to really look into this. I hope those who are engaged in this new process of democracy in Sri Lanka, because there is a need for an independent Sangha in Sri Lanka. The roots of unrest. We will not be complete in this presentation if we don't step back a little bit and go into the roots of unrest, which the Buddha talked about. Satya, the rule of gods, once asked the Buddha, when beings all wish to live in peace, why are they perpetually embroiled in conflict? The Buddha responded, it is the bonds of envy and miserliness that bind beings so that although they wish to live without hate, hostility, or enmity, and to live in peace, yet they live in hate, harming one another, hostile and as enemies. What gives rise to envy and miserliness? What is their origin? How are they born? How do they arise? When what is presented, do they arise? When what is absent, do they arise? The Buddha said, envy and miserliness arise from liking and disliking. This is their origin. This is how they are born, how they arise. When they are present, they arise. When they're absent, they do not arise. Moving on now to the final stages, which is from problems to solutions. in the process of governance, the Buddha came up with a very clear set of values for rulers or the leadership. The 10 royal virtues: giving, dana; moral conduct, sila; relinquishment, parichaga; honesty, ajava; gentleness, madhava; personal austerity, tapa; non-anger, akkoda; non-injury, ahimsa; patience, kanti; and non-opposition to the will of the people, avirodha. And in the Kukka Jataka, in the Jataka tales, describes the virtual king as one who, following these 10 royal virtues, ruling in accordance with the Dhamma, brings about prosperity and progress for himself and others without troubling anyone. So we have ways out. Excuse me. So moving on now to the future as far as a sustainable Sri Lanka. The Buddha's techniques enable us to deal with causes of unrest and conflict. The world needs to move from fire brigade after the fact responses to dealing with causes of conflict. Of course, the Four Noble Truths provide a very clear scientific and analytical way of doing it. The future of Sri Lanka is a sustainable Sri Lanka. Faced with existential threats such as COVID-19, climate change, and now energy shortages, the future of the world is a sustainable world. That's where the jobs are. The Dhamma points the way to a sustainable world. The solutions, the process, the methodology, all of it in statecraft, in economic policies, in sustainable thinking and living for the now is in the Dhamma. We need to turn the searchlight inwards. And the democratic traditions of Sri Lanka go back some 2,500 years. The Buddha and his disciples established a democratic Sangha. In their lives, they walked the talk. They demonstrated an inclusive Sangha based on meritocracy, transparency, and accountability. The process of justice was fair and just for all. The Buddha supported entrepreneurship and challenged the merchants of his day also to take care of the disadvantaged. Above all, the Buddha demonstrated sustainable consumption based on need, not greed. Buddhism offers, in my mind, dynamic and exciting teachings for a sustainable Sri Lanka and a sustainable world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Don. And I think we are now ready to take any questions that anyone might have with regards to the content that has been covered through Don's presentation. Would there be anyone who would like to ask a question or to suggest or contribute anything towards the session, please? I see that M. Samar Singha's mic has been unmuted. Okay, I guess that was a mistake. Don, when on the parts that we have covered, and when going into the systems change and looking at systems that have or that are currently in place, which do foster corruption, foster not so transparent ways. What can we learn from Buddhism with regards to an effective electoral system that can be transparent in a way and also lead way to good governance? What do you think, Don?
That's an absolutely important question, but I would describe as a $64,000 question. Your response is in two parts, so I'll respond to the first one, which is really, really important. And this is where there is a distinct response from Buddhism concerning systems. Mm-hmm. As I understand it, in terms of what the Buddha and his disciples said and did, is that both personal change and systemic change are interconnected. Mm-hmm. You can't have systemic change without personal change. And in order to sustain sustainable systemic change, you need to have personal change. They go both together. And going beyond Marx, and I'm going to now be very clear, going beyond the political philosophers of the time, what he also talked about is a permanent and sustainable change. Can you imagine the beauty and the majesty of the teachings of the Tipitaka? In terms of electoral processes, these are things which in any nation people will have to go into. Because you have different types of systems. First past the post system, as it is in the case of the UK, different systems in Canada, different systems in the US, a different system in Sri Lanka. But there has to be, all I would say, taking these out of from what the Buddha practiced and from the experience of the case studies, is that there was a permanent kind of a openness and transparency dialogue about the systems. Is it helpful? Is it beneficial or not? So when matters were brought to the attention of the Buddha, there was a hearing. And if there were changes to be done, changes were made to be done. But changes will have to be done in consultation with the people.
So dialogue that would allow a sense of ability for people to determine what happens. Don, in recent times, we also have, I'm just going to also remark that if you have any questions, please let us know. You could use the emojis, the reactions in the reaction section to raise your hand through the reactions and signal to us that you have something to contribute or ask. And we would be very happy to allow you the time. Or you could also put your questions into the chat section. When we look at the current situation that we are facing with Sri Lanka, in recent media sharings, we've seen the term beach party being used to address to the protest that is currently happening at Goldface Green. What is the right way to protest?
Well, I think the way in which I am extremely disappointed if terms have been used to describe the describe the protests that are taking place. I would personally call this a people's movement. I really wouldn't call it a protest. It is really a people's movement. And to me, since independence, we haven't seen anything like this. So this is something which suddenly manifested, and it has been picked up by people right throughout the nation. It is a movement, and it is a very interesting and unique movement because it engages everybody. It's wonderful to see old and young, rich, poor, irrespective of caste, creed, or differences or whatever, coming together. A protest is much, or a movement is much, as it is effective. So far, it has been effective in removing an existing cabinet. But I think what is important is that the protest or the movement needs to be sustainable if it is to be effective. All I would like to say is that I'm glad this has happened, but for democracy to survive and for democracy to thrive, there has to be eternal vigilance. There has to be eternal vigilance. So these energies that are now being created needs to be sustained.
Absolutely.
And also you find that in the case of Buddhism, what the Buddha talked about is Bhigarattang hitaya sukhaya, lasting welfare and happiness.
Yes.
So how do we make these concerns lasting? This is really quite important.
Absolutely, and I think in today's morning news, Sri Lankan morning news, a young individual made the same remark, where calling upon the power of the youth, and IT and all of these skills that the youth seem to be having to use it to sort of put together a plan for sustainability with regard to the movement. And I think that is very important. With regards to what we are seeing the world over and these sorts of situations, we always find the Buddhist monks, whether it was the electoral process, which happened a couple years back, or many elections prior. What do you think, Don, when it comes to monks coming to the forefront, giving credibility to certain individuals? What do you think should be considered before they do so, in order to have a sustainable form of Sangha leadership?
Yes, Bhante, you are putting me on the spot now. And there are two things. There is one that you mentioned earlier on, which was about this young person calling for a sustainable process in Sri Lanka. I would like to comment on that, but let me take the second one concerning how things should be in the case of the Sangha is slightly beyond my pay grade.
Yes.
But I will leave that to the leadership of the Sangha. But what I would like to state here, looking and learning from what the Buddha said and did. First of all, he did not shy away from speaking truth to power.
Absolutely.
He established an independent Sangha. The disciples came from all kinds of backgrounds, including also from some of his family. And they were fearless when it came to speaking truth to power. So it was an independent Sangha. They were not beholden to individuals for state protection, as was the case with the spiritual leaders during the time of the Buddha. So the Buddha made some systemic changes. This is really quite important to realize. It was a paradigm shift. because the spiritual leaders at the time were those who received the patronage of the state. And the Buddha broke away from that to establish an independent leadership of the spiritual leaders and also to work with the state, so that there was partnership. When the kings wanted advice, advice was given. And then also there was reciprocation in terms of meals, danas that were given by those who were in power amongst the aristocracy for the benefit of the Sangha. So it has to be a partnership. The process, the ordinance needs to be looked into because it is a very badly written, it is painful to read it because it was written in 1931, has not been really revised, and it is something which needs to be done by the Sri Lankan people.
Mm. When you say that, Don, I'm reminded of the stories that we find in the Tripitaka, where the Buddhist monks, at times when they did not agree with the actions of the king, and they would sometimes receive alms from the king, but not eat at the king's palace. They would move on, or they would even go to the extent where, for example, in the Tripitaka, in the moral code of conduct, the most aggressive form of protest against action mentioned by the Buddha is a protest where the bhikkhus go on alms with their bowls turned upside down to not receive alms food, to not welcome, basically saying or giving the message of not receiving anything from an individual. And we saw the same type of protest held in 2004, as I remember, if I have the year correct, against the junta in Myanmar. And the junta took it so personally that that the Saffron Revolution ended up in the massacre of so many monks living in Yangon and around Yangon. So we are reminded of these situations. And also I am reminded of, because you mentioned about the legislation with regards to the Sri Lankan constitution, which gives prominence to Buddhism. And I am reminded of the story where a Brahmin, when he wanted to convert to becoming a follower of the Buddha said, the only way that you could become my follower is if you continue to give the boons and the alms and the offerings that you have been giving to the Sangha that you have been with. If you continue that is the only way that I would accept you. Right? Because we have this conversation, and Don, I would like some of your feedback with, I know this might be a very strong statement to make, but with the strong history we have with racial violence, some people question whether it is appropriate to have Buddhism stated within the constitution. What do you think, Don? Do you think removal of the prominence given to Buddhism within the constitution would help cure the racism that we systematically see in Sri Lanka?
Once again, you're putting me on the spot, but I would like to respond, and I would like to go to that very interesting case study which you highlighted, which actually was about General Siha. It's the Siha Sutta, I think it is. And it is about this very prominent general who came to see the Buddha. But before he went to see the Buddha, he went to see a spiritual leader. I think it was Nigantanathaputta, and Nigantanathaputta then raised certain issues about the Buddha with the general. And he called him all kinds of names. And then the spiritual leader asked the general to check with the Buddha and find out whether these concerns are true or not. The general went then to see the Buddha, and then he placed these concerns in front of the Buddha, and the Buddha responded. And the responses were quite extraordinary. But then after the responses, he then immediately wanted to join the Sangha, and the Buddha said, hold on a minute. Don't rush. Take your time. General Siha, take your time. Study the Dhamma first. See whether it is useful. Practice the Dhamma. See whether it is useful. Then join the Sangha. But then he also said, when you join the Sangha, and this is for me one of the most incredible examples of interfaith unity and cooperation, which we often talk about in the world, but this is probably one of the first such events in recorded history in the world, where he told General Siha, but when you join the Sangha, don't neglect the spiritual traditions that you have been providing support to. Continue with that.
Yeah.
And that is something which we need to realize. As to whether to take on, I have also thought about this, as to whether to take the references in the Constitution out or not. I personally think that this particular section covers everything, as far as I'm concerned. It covers everything even more effectively than the written Constitution. And I'm going to be going out of my limb to say that. Because the teachings of the Tripitaka are pretty clear when it comes to inclusion, respect, equity, equality, respect for language, behavior, social and economic policies, and so on. But we have never had a conversation concerning how we apply Buddhist principles to the executive, judiciary, and to the parliament, legislature.
It is not a tried and tested mechanism that we have.
Yes, we have not had any real, we have always had commissions, particularly on how to foster Buddhism in the country and so on and so forth, but never what do these principles mean for the nation. This is where I think the biggest gap is. I wonder if there are any others, Bhante, by any chance, who are present here. I wonder if others would like to come in.
Yes, of course. Gaini, your mic is unmuted. Yes, Gaini.
Yeah. Hi, Don. Firstly, thank you for very detailed presentation. It's really interesting to hear what Buddha has kind of preached 2005 plus years ago regarding this aspect. So thank you, Don, Mr. Don, for the very, very in detail presentation. So particularly, I like what you mentioned about how we need to discipline the individuals first to discipline the whole country. And the fact that leaders needs to well discipline first in order for the countrymen to do so. So that's really interesting point. I'd like to understand from Bhante and Mr. Don, anyone else you can explain, is there any when in selecting a good leader, is there any guidelines given in Buddhism or any kind of, anything relevant to that? Sorry about my son. But I would like to really understand that.
I would like, I'm sorry, but do you like to respond or shall I do?
You can go ahead, Tom.
Gaini, I think it is important when it comes to selecting a leader, not only just a leader, but if you are, in the case of Sri Lanka, if you are selecting a leader or a party, you need to find out how they are in their manifestos, how they plan to apply the Buddhist principles. I would like to see an elaboration of this. I think one of the very clear set of principles that the Buddha outlined are the 10 principles of governance, the Dasa Vijurada Dhamma. No one is really perfect, but it's important to see at least how some of these things are enunciated and applied. So I would say the guidelines are very clear, and they are in the 10 principles of governance, which we referred to earlier.
Absolutely. And if I might also add something directly from the Tripitaka, the aspects that the Buddha has taught that we should look in a leader come down to 5 very specific aspects. The first, Attanyu. Attanyu means the ability to discriminate between right and wrong, meaning not deluded by ignorance and tanha. 2, sorry about that. My apologies, a bit too passionate. 2, Dhammanyu, which is righteous in mind. 3, Matanyu, knows the limit of punishment. Knows the limit of punishment. 4, Kalanyu, knows what is the right time to act. Knowing the right time to act, right time to be in the country, to leave the country, to take on negotiations, all of these things. Knowing the right time. This speaks about an individual who is truly present to the community, the people, the nation, present. And then 5, Parisanyu, which is knows his assembly and what type of people they are. The Buddha goes on to say that any leader should practice that Dasa Raja Dhamma, Dana, Sila, Parichaga, Ajava, Madhava, Tapa, Akodha, Avihimsa, Khanti, and Avirodha. The Dasa Raja Dhammas, I think Don also mentioned the Dasa Raja Dhammas within the presentation. So that is your answer from the Tripitaka context, Gaini. I hope that suffices.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Bhante.
Yes.
Sorry, Bhante, go on.
Please go on, Don. Please go on.
No, I'm just wondering if there are any others in the Sangha or in those present here who would like to make any points. If not, I might even just name you and ask you to make some statements, because you really can't be looking at what's going on in Sri Lanka. We can't have a passive audience. Any others?
We have a comment which has been directly sent to me, Don, so I will not disclose the name, right? I will read out the comment. I guess in Sri Lanka, we have different nikayas which goes against the principles of the Buddha. There are monks who enjoy favors from the government and live in luxury, but not living the teachings of the Buddha. Buddhism and Buddhists are penalized due to the corrupt monks. Would you like to offer some insight on this, Don? But I would like to offer some insight myself. So maybe
No,
after you.
I think after you, Bante, I'll let you go first this time.
Well, I personally believe that as Sri Lankans, we love the blame game. And we see it being played out throughout our history. To quote Imran Khan on tackling corruption within the within the nation, Imran Khan very rightly mentioned that corruption cannot be tackled by just one class of people, but only can be done effectively through the dedication of people all throughout. What I might say, because we do hear this, and we do hear this very often, especially during this time, when the monks did do something wrong, which is clear that some monks did clearly violate the principles laid down by the Buddha, did not the devotees continue to support these people? Did not the people around, the villagers, all get in on the support? So then, is it fair to just blame one person? Because usually if a child does something wrong, the parents are blamed. We must realize this, that we cannot play the blame game any longer, but we must all take responsibility for the state of our nation today. If we are Sri Lankan, at one point in our lives, we or someone that we know has bribed someone. That is a given in Sri Lanka. If you want to get something done, you have to bribe. And if you did, you have played a part in the level of corruption we are as a community experiencing today. So we must all take responsibility. We must all take responsibility for the situation and no longer go ahead with these sorts of mundane and sort of very weak procedures of playing the blame game. Because this malice exists in every part, educated and uneducated, politicians or not, clergy or lay. This malice exists in all parts of our communities, and we must take responsibility for our own contributions. That is what I would like to say.
That's very great. There is Saumya who has raised the hand.
Saumya, yes, Saumya.
Dr. Senanayaka, yes. Go ahead, Dr. Senanayaka.
Thank you, Don. I've really enjoyed your talk this evening. I was just reflecting on my own experiences as someone who has lived and worked both in Sri Lanka and in the UK. And I wanted to bring up something perhaps even more subtle than what Bante spoke about just now, which is that we are contributing to corruption if we support that type of system by contributing in terms of bribes and so on. Something I have struggled with in my personal experience is where I have felt on occasion that someone is discriminated or something that isn't fair is being carried out by whoever the person or persons invested with power. So I'm speaking at a very micro level. I'm speaking very much at the level of an individual, an employee, a very small cog in the bigger wheel. And my question here is something I've struggled with personally, which is that you see something happen, and especially during in instances that took place in this country, in Sri Lanka here, something I've seen is that people have a tendency to look the other way. And apart from the person who is directly affected, the rest of that group tend to step back. And I have sort of struggled with wondering whether this comes from a stance of, not being averse to conflict, being averse to confrontation, perhaps even being nonviolent. I don't know. But I was thinking while I was listening to the latter part of your talk and the discussion about what the 3 key take-home messages might be for me. Perhaps bringing it down from what the entire focus of the talk was, but as a person, as an employee, as a member of an organization, when you see something that isn't quite right happening, and how you might, how a Buddhist might address that. That really is something I would like very much to hear your views and Bhante's views on, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Bhante, would you like to go first? I'll come in.
Please go ahead, Don. Please.
Yep. Thank you, Madhuri. Thank you, Dr. Serenayaka. I, of course, have direct experience of that because you deal with, in the various institutions that I have worked with, both at the macro and at the micro level, you see things that are happening and you take it up. At the same time, you find that, of course, this is not something which only concerns Sri Lanka. In my experience, and I have worked in some 130, 136 odd countries, this situation is very much the same. In general, I would like to say that in faith communities, there is something which is called willful blindness between the community not to act. Why? Because it would upset people. People don't want to make waves. It would upset and it would then create bad reputations to those involved, and it would damage the place of work or the country or whatever. So there is a tendency for people to say, okay, keep quiet about these things, don't stir the pot. But at the same time, at the micro level, it is very clear that there could be areas to act, areas of action. What would be good is, of course, to make sure that you study the various complaints and grievance procedures in your place, to see if it is possible to talk in confidence with those who are knowledgeable about the law. Consult a lawyer or somebody who is a counselor who is knowledgeable about these things to act. Then take action. If the matter requires active involvement. And those who have done so, sometimes these actions or these activities may be resolved immediately. Sometimes it requires a sustained commitment to see changes taking place. This has been my personal experience. It is important to find out if there are areas for redress in the place where you are working.
I think this sort of thank you, Dr. Serenayaka. I think your question is very valiant and appropriate to the discussions that we have had. And we also should sort of understand, I think, being in a country like, I'm guessing that Professor Senanayake is here, Dr. Senanayake is here in the UK, but should you live in a country like Sri Lanka, sometimes those proper procedures are not in place. However, times are changing, and we see that all the more in practice now. Times are changing, and more opportunities are upon us to bring to light these doings, these actions. And if I am, as a Buddhist monk, if I am to speak about my profession, if I may call it a profession, and my sort of field, most of the wrong that we see institutionalized is because someone before remained quiet. The abuse that we see again and again and again is because someone did not have the guts to bring it out. But because we come from a very cultural background, it is also known that you do not want to be the person who rocked the boat. So there is, as a community, there is growth needed, development needed to understand the results of our actions, the results of the way that we think, and how many people have become victims because of our cultural pattern of thought. So I might just like to add that into the mix. Don, we also have Lucky Disanayake.
Indeed.
To make a comment or ask a question. Lucky, you can unmute yourself, please.
Yep, I have. Thank you. It's been very interesting. I heard about you today from Malikanti, and I'm in London. So she sent me your video, and I watched it. And today was a very interesting session. So I will write to you separately. And Don, I've also separately sent you an email. So I was born in Sri Lanka, grew up in England, spent most of my life here, and went back to live in Sri Lanka in 2013 to care for my mum when my father passed away because she was disabled. And I have observed Sri Lanka as a Sri Lankan, born Sri Lanka, but as a person with, shall we say, a westernized brain. And I found it really interesting what is going on in Sri Lanka right now. So I wish the people's movement much success, because change in every fabric of Sri Lanka is long, long overdue. I say this with firsthand experience of what it's like to be an entrepreneur, what it's like to work in the country, what it's like to try to get anything done. My previous company, although I raised a lot of money for the business, we did not pay bribes. We had a 4-year dance with one of the politicians. I don't fundamentally meet any of these people, so you can never get anything done. But it's the rent-seeking psychology of the rich people. Somehow, I don't know why, but as a country that professes to be Buddhist, the moral fabric of the country is very, very lacking. And I think that is a function of the fact that lots of reasons have contributed to it. But primarily, media has a lot to contribute as well. So in addition to the fact that the politicians are a nightmare, you listen to the fact that psychology, which is the reality of how people in Sri Lanka think. And whilst they never say anything to your face, they do everything behind your back. And it's completely lacking the ethics and the moral. I don't know what has happened to this country. It's very sad, because as a country, it's full of incredible opportunity and incredible people who have incredible capacity. But somehow along the line, it has got lost. So I hope that this reality that has dawned on everybody, because now we're in a place that nobody's going to help unless we get our act together, that there will be change. And there will be change where people start to question, not have blind belief, not have rent seekers, not look up to people, not worship Sangha who just believe in corruption, and have politicians. And the bowing and scraping that you see in front of politicians, I found revolting, to be honest. But that, it takes, if somebody is to take a bribe, somebody has to pay it. And if you pay it, then, as you say, you are contributing to this. So it was very, very interesting to listen to this talk today. I am an entrepreneur. I am a Buddhist. I have studied Buddhism in my history. I don't go to temple and follow Buddhism the way it's done in Sri Lanka, but I really believe that I am practicing Buddhism, and I'm doing a lot for the environment. So I would like to come and have a chat with you separately. But to say it was a very interesting, today it was more of a comment of what I think is wrong in Sri Lanka. And I think we have to go back to basics, and total system change is what is required, because tinkering with whoever's running the place is not enough. The media is disgusting to watch. And it's really, it has contributed enormously to the decay of the society in that country, I think. And those are things that have to change. And so I wish all these young people a lot of vigor and hope that they will actually make change that is likely to be lasting. I'm hopeful for the country, but I will stand by and watch and see whether any of that really happens.
Thank you. But can I ask you a question as to how you would go about doing things? How would you, whilst you're of course here and there, how would you initiate changes that are lasting?
First of all, I think it's important to have unity amongst all the people. And so we stop calling ourselves Sinhala, Buddhist, Burger, whatever. We call ourselves Sri Lankans, so that we should be proud to be from this country. Secondly, I think there should be no, so I think, first of all, get rid of this 225 people. Maximum, you need 22 people. If the UK has 22 ministers, then what are we doing with so many more? I would not have all these endless elections all the time. And I would basically beef up the judiciary so that actually we have law and order in a way that works. To get anything done in Sri Lanka, you need to go to court for years to get a result. So if there is no law and order, you are not going to have anything done. And the law should be above everybody. And then I would pass legislation to stop the television being what nonsense it is. All you have to do is follow the British Broadcasting Corporation rules and see how television should be. If you are going to have an argument, then you need to have an enlightened audience and not put drivel on television. So those are the things that I would actively do. As a business, what I am doing now in Sri Lanka is looking at how we can look after our natural assets and generate revenue from those natural assets. I have written to you separately on that. And so those are the things I would do, to do ground, active work on the ground. And I think also the way things are done, I would just fundamentally change pretty much everything that is done in the way that it's done. So if you're a small business, I wouldn't expect you to go and have 400 different meetings to try to get nothing done. I would just get rid of all of this red tape and regulation. I would also change the banking system so that it actually supports entrepreneurship. I mean, I can tell you the 1,001 things I would do differently if I was running Sri Lanka.
What is the one thing that you would focus on in order to bring about change? What is the one thing you could start on?
I've already done it. I'm doing it right now.
Which is?
What I'm doing is right now is to look at how we can generate revenues from the ecosystem services that our country provides.
Okay.
And to share that with local communities so that they put a value on nature and they respect. And
how do you do that with the ecosystems? Give me an example.
Carbon revenues.
Okay.
Carbon revenues, biodiversity revenues. I'm working with somebody from the IMF to do this as well.
Okay.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Lucky. And
I'm going to come and meet you before I go back to Sri Lanka.
Oh, fantastic.
Lovely. All right. That was very lively. Now, anything else?
There is a comment, Bhante, in the chat. This is for you. Is it correct for a bhikkhu to fast unto death? During his time, did this sort of thing happen during the time of the Buddha? Please explain.
Okay. I mean, if you at least attempting to do such a thing, just make sure that you can hold on to it at least for a week. It would be my first suggestion, because we did see them sort of being transported to the hospital just after the lapse of a day, which is a little bit embarrassing. However, I believe with what we see happening all across the country, I believe that we must respect diversity of views and the freedom of expression to an extent where we value the effort that they have put in to sort of show, to demonstrate their views. However, was it done during the time of the Buddha? Not for something like this. Not for something like this. Don, do you remember any instances?
No, there haven't been any instances at all.
Not for something like this. I mean, the monks were very, very, they knew the line. They knew the line. And because there was such a strong Dhammic practice and understanding of the practice, monks didn't really have to do so much to get attention during the time, right? There was true respect. And to the comment, or rather the question which Lucky brought out, why is it that the fabric, the moral fabric of our country is so weak? If we simply looking at the fact Sri Lanka received Buddhism from India, we were so proud of it. So much so that we were proud of having Buddhism rather than actually proud of practicing Buddhism. So we, over the years, we hoisted so many ceremonies, so much of veneration being given to the tooth relic, being given to all of these aspects and elements, which is all praiseworthy. However, what the Buddha says is, rather than giving 10,000 danas, practicing metta for a moment is Mahatpalai Mahanisansai, is of greater merit. That is what the Buddha says. So why is it that we have forgotten that? Why is it that we have forgotten that? Have we become so egocentric and unaware that we have forgotten to be aware and sensitive to these issues that we face? So that is my addition there. Lakshmi, yes, Lakshmi.
While thanking Bante and Mr. Don, I like to add one thing. To change all this, we must change from the school system. We have a lot of responsibility in our education system. We should have some changes, because in the present education system, although we have religious schools, we must teach the children to respect all the religions while learning deeply about one religion. And also, we must train the children to have a backbone, which is very lacking in our school system. That is, we are bowing everybody, we are worshipping everybody, every elder. We shouldn't do that. We should respect the parents and the teachers, of course, but not all the politicians. And if you go to a house in Sri Lanka, even if you don't know the people, they will ask all the children to come and worship you just because we have gray hair and we are elderly. So that shouldn't be the practice. They should have a backbone. The school should teach the children. That is how the leadership, one quality of leadership should be. Now, I taught in a school, and I'm very grateful to being in Ananda College for 10 years, where Mr. Rajapaksa, who didn't allow children to worship everybody, just to bow. And even the child was given a seat in the office when a student came to talk to the principal. So we must respect the children also. And we must let the children admire the environment and go to the garden, let them go to the garden and the names of the plants and the animals. And so our school system is lacking all that. And it is tuition and exams. I think we should have a change in that direction too, to get our future generation at least with a stronger backbone.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi. Do you have any comment on that, Don?
Yes, I do. I'd like to just ask, sorry, I've forgotten the name of the last speaker.
Lakshmi.
Lakshmi. What exactly, where is it in the Tripitaka where the Buddha has told people to worship him?
It is not, that is the thing, that we are not following the Tripitaka.
Yes, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
I'm asking, have you come across any statement in the Tripitaka where the Buddha has said in any of his discourses where somebody should be worshipping him?
No, not at all. That's the thing.
Yes, so that's what I'm asking.
Yes.
So what does Vandana mean? Sorry about this.
Yeah, Vandana is that those to be respected.
Yes, Vandana means to be respectful. Vandana has not just in Sri Lanka, but Vandana in the Buddhist world, even amongst the temples in the UK, has turned into sort of worship. Real veneration.
Yes.
It is a very corrupt practice.
Yeah, that's
in my view.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with you, Mr. Don. So
it's done, by the way. It's done. But this is something which really need to be discussed as to whether Vandana is really worship or is it just simply respectful. Vandana is a neuter noun. It's also feminine in Pali, and it means respecting. When you pay homage to someone, when you go to refuge, it means that you are respectful. It doesn't mean that you worship somebody.
Yes.
It's something which needs to be discussed about.
Yes, so that's it. It has to come from the school system, from this. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Lots to do. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Lakshmi, and thank you, Don. Yohani, I feel like I saw you unmute yourself. I wonder whether you're still with us, whether you have a question. I don't think Yohani is here. All right. Is there anyone, before we wrap up the session, is there anyone who would like to make any final remarks or any questions that they would like to ask? All right. Don, would you like to share any final remarks?
I really think it is important at this juncture to look at what is happening in Sri Lanka. It is also important for those with the knowledge and practice of Buddhism also to take a lead by that. I don't mean just simply monks, but also Buddhist societies who are knowledgeable, acting with a conscience. I would have liked to have seen, in the case of the recent shooting, what I learned from the media again is that the first to arrive at the scene were those from the human rights bodies. I would have liked to have seen those eminent persons from Buddhist institutions arrive at the scene as well. It would be interesting to find out what exactly the prominent Buddhist institutions, leaving aside the Sangha for the moment, that is the Bhikkhu and the Bhikkhuni Sangha, are doing. Are there any discussions about what exactly Buddhism is? Are there discussions about what the Buddha said and did? Are there discussions about Buddhist governance and its applicability? I don't see a dynamic sense of action there. And it is where I think we need to start. And that is the place, I think, where we need to start. And the Buddhist institutions, the lay people in the lay communities need to give the leadership here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don. And to what I would like to add before we close the session for today, acknowledging that we have gone a little bit ahead of the allocated time. Apologies, but I think the conversation was very fruitful. With the comments that Lakshmi was making and Don supporting with regards to veneration, puja, the Buddha in the Mangala Sutra says, puja, pujacha, pujaniyana.
Yes.
Etang mangalam uttama. It is to say, venerating those who are worthy, or rather respecting those who are worthy of respect. Worthy of respect. The Buddha is a person who also taught us that Silabbata Paramasa is not in line with Dhamma. What is Silabbata Paramasa? If to put it blatantly in the most Sinhala way possible, Karanna Vale Karanama. I have noted that I'm becoming more and more Sinhala. Karanna Vale Karanama. Other people are respecting, so I respect. Other people are getting the politicians to sign on the registration day of the marriage, so I will do so as well. Other people are... This is one of the reasons for the downfall of our society. And as human beings, the people that we have an effect upon as well. The Buddha has been, as Don has mentioned throughout today's discourse, the Buddha is very clear with his guidance and leadership, very clear. We simply have to open our eyes and just read, listen. And that guidance applies to both clergy and lay. We need to contemplate on our own, what can I do? Even if it is to, what can I do? Not just simply allowing the youth to do what they do when, twiddling our thumbs, but what can we really do? Asking the question from ourselves. Because as Sri Lankans or as citizens of whatever country, if we are facing this malice, it is our responsibility to do what we can. We find ourselves again and again faced with situations which really does challenge our morals. It is important to note that regardless, this might also, as the Buddha says, everything arises and passes. We must understand, regardless of what arises and passes, we must keep our morals intact. How we respond to situations, how we choose to react to the instances that we come to face. This is very important. Not jumping on the bandwagon and celebrating or sort of doing the things that other people are doing. Remember, Buddhism is all about going against the flow. It's really about going against the stream of the river. It is not really about going with, it's going against, doing what is hard to do. Don, you're smiling. I know why. Doing what is difficult and hard to do. And sometimes we might not get justice today or tomorrow. But we must stay determined. We must stay determined. It is very easy to blame. It is very easy to put all the responsibilities on one person. But remember, we are all equally responsible. We are all equally responsible. I remember when we won the war in Sri Lanka, I had just finished my O-levels. I just finished my last exam, actually. I remember that in my mind as a young person, it never occurred to me what the people in the north, or what those refugees, or what was going on. We were so enthralled with enjoyment and patriotic happiness that we never considered the repercussions of war. We were in Colombo. You all must have been here. Thinking about another person is a part of metta. Is a part of metta. The Buddha has taught this. Now we know. So let us act. Make the necessary changes that need to be made today, this very moment, to ensure that we do not pass the malice, the virus, this insidious, malignant virus on, but it stops from us. That is my final words for today. Thank you very much, Don.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining in today. The real inspiration behind this was to really discuss, to have a forum where we could sort of talk about, see what the Buddha really taught, because of all the confusions that we've come to face through the media, through the social media outlets, all of these things. And it's very important to stay connected. And we thought, Don and I discuss these things on a regular, and we thought it was very apt and appropriate that we have this sort of forum under this topic, so that people could sort of gauge something with regard to what the Buddha taught. And this is very important, we thought. So I hope that all of you have benefited from today's discourse, forum, sharing, discussion, question and answer session, from everything that we had to offer. We must thank Don for all the time that he has contributed to putting together the slides and preparing for this day today. So thank you very much, Don. You are always so on point with all of these current issues, and we hope to see you again. So thank you, all of you, for joining, making the time to join in and support the session. And we hope to see you again at another session under the Dhamma Center's Sustainability Series. Thank you, Don. Thank you, everyone. See you later.
Bhante. It was a wonderful discussion.
Thank you all.